Hello, I'm Robert Charetta, and this is International Investor. We are alone in the studio, so for a moment I can take off my mask to at least deliver this monologue, coming from our studio offices, which are just outside of Washington, D.C. It's been a most interesting year, of course, with the Wuhan virus emanating from China and, of course, ravaging the world and its economies. And it turns out that right now we're in the Ides of October, and that means that the World Bank and IMF are conducting their meetings and with their prognosticators trying to give a guess of what's going to happen in the year ahead and trying to assess the damage that has been done by, indeed, this virus and its effect on peoples across the globe. We are also, of course, facing a presidential election, so perhaps by the time you even see this broadcast, we'll all know the results. But we say, regardless of who wins in the first week of November, what we are going to see is a president that has to cope with the damage done. And we think that damage is going to continue to play out for the year ahead. This is actually the fourth in our programs that we've focused on the effects of the COVID-19 virus on our economies here in the United States. And we, in earlier broadcasts, told you about our pessimistic outlook and our rather dire predictions for the world ahead, not just in 2021, but indeed in several years to follow at least. Because we see fundamental changes coming as the world tries to address this continuing infection rate that can play out for a long time to come, whether or not effective vaccines are discovered and deployed. And again, I believe we're going to see the ramifications of this devastation on the economic front play out into politics and, of course, social unrest everywhere. But for now, in this report, we're going to focus on the world economy and outlook with the help of an organization based in the United Kingdom and composed of people from their intelligence agencies previously and the Royal Marines, which are roughly equivalent to our Navy SEALs here in the United States. So let's go now to our special guest. Coming live to us from the United Kingdom, he's the founder of a group called the Future Strategy Club. First of all, let me just say, Justin Small, thank you for being with us, Justin.
Thank you for having me.
First, let's ask a little bit about your firm. You're the founder, but I understand it's composed of some interesting people that you've brought together. I imagine these are people with some very special skills that you have, especially in the area of investigations and learning what's going on when they're on the ground in these various parts of the world. Now, I imagine your people are spread around the world a bit, or do you do most of it right from the UK?
Well, we started in the UK, but we now have people in LA, in New York, in Chicago. We have some in Australia. We're actually looking at the United States. The model allows us to really go where the talent is and to kind of really scale quite well, quite rapidly, and the disruption that's happening in the market now, and which will be around for quite a while, is kind of this model was made for that, because companies need to bring in talent for short projects. They don't want to hire. They want to actually kind of downsize sometimes, but they still need particular talent that maybe they don't want to come in permanent, and we have that talent.
Is your customer base spread across both private industry as well as some government agencies do you consult with today?
Yeah, mainly kind of corporations, large. You know, we've worked with lots of corporations in the States and in the UK. We do have some in the intelligence side, but that's an area that we're looking at. We have some people with experience, but it's not our core market.
Okay, well, boy, do they need help now. At International Investor for a couple decades now, we also try to assess global risks on a regular basis, and we try to forecast and foresee into the future ourselves. So you're the perfect kind of organization for us to talk to give us more insight of what's going on around the world. And that's what we want to talk about today. And I'm going to ask you about a number of instances around the world where we see new turmoil really happening on a national scale. But let's first talk about what are the things that your clients are most worried about in this COVID-19 environment, which has largely shut down a lot of their operations or made life very difficult and sluggish for them to operate. What's their number one or two or three concerns?
Well, I think one of them is obviously surviving, and survival that can take many forms, can't it? You can react as a CEO, as a CFO. You can react to this by cutting your marketing, the standard what I would call fight or flight mechanism, where you just cut. And actually, there's some good data out from HBR recently about that they'd analyzed organizations in recessions who cut marketing and those who didn't, but just redeployed it to the right areas. And those that cut marketing grew less, came out of the recessions in a much worse place. So it's not natural. The natural thing is to try and cut. I think the main challenge for a lot of physical services and product companies is to move into digital in a proper way. Now, most of these companies have these kind of digital transformation programs going for the last 3-4 years, which kind of just roll on. And because there was no real kind of what you'd call a burning platform for it, they do a bit. They haven't really driven that kind of digital version of what they sell on the market. And now you're seeing a lot of companies not being able to deliver their physical products and services and having to really quickly pivot to digital. And that's one of the key challenges, especially when you're actually having to cut some of your more kind of innovative staff because they're not the ones that are delivering on the floor. You suddenly need to move very quickly into new markets. That's a massive challenge for culturally as well.
Yeah. Well, what we see there, though, is probably even more importance for the technology people that are in these companies, as you said, and yet probably less emphasis maybe on some of those who are in sales or marketing or some other avenues where they have to cut. But it also signals to us two things. Number one, that this is going to be a human resource crisis in a lot of these firms because it's tough enough to let people go, and we see that everywhere. Day after day here in the United States, we hear large companies letting rather sizable portions of their employee base, telling them they're either furloughed or permanently unemployed. And secondly, it also says that, well, there could be a contagion effect, we call it at International Investor. The contagion effect is, well, if 10 companies, 20 companies, 300 companies are doing this at once, it makes it that much more difficult an environment to successfully sell to because all your surrounding companies are also cutting back and trying to scale back everything they're doing. And that can really create an economic crisis of larger proportion. Let's get, though, to this issue of unemployment. Here in the United States, the figures are really pretty dire. Everybody, it seems, in the Wall Street and business press tries to put a better rose-colored kind of glass on the new figures that keep coming out. But the fact is, we've seen tens of millions of unemployed people and more being added every day to the long-term unemployment. UK, you seeing a similar issue, and are you seeing it worldwide?
The UK is, and our first scheme, as it was, is coming to an end at the end of October, and the predictions are pretty awful of what's going to happen. There is a new one starting, which is only for the areas that are in complete lockdown, tier 3 as it's called. But that, yeah, exactly as you say, that kind of mass kind of influx of people onto the market looking for jobs it's obvious. The economics of it are pretty obvious, aren't they? Those people don't have the money, don't have the security to spend money, and therefore every other company suffers because of that.
Let's talk about that. On a worldwide basis, we're seeing the COVID virus impacting countries all around the world. India is now showing some of the worst infection rates. Everywhere you turn, and where it's not being carefully reported, it's probably because either authorities are hiding it or they just don't have the means to collect the information. So in our estimation, this virus continues to plague the world for at least another year ahead, maybe more. before the world and a vaccine arrives and starts to even try to get it under control. That spells to us, with the high unemployment, the businesses going under, social unrest coming. Now, we've already seen a fair amount of that in the United States. You've seen some of it in the UK. But you can imagine that this social unrest is going to start playing out around the world. Do you see signs of it? Do your people report that things are getting a little bit dicey in other economies around the world?
Social unrest and the rise of populism is probably part of, in my view, the last 10 years of how we've run economies with austerity and cutting back. Whether you agree that was needed or not, it has had a cause that people have lost hope. There's a lot of analysis and research around when people lose hope, they move towards populism.
In addition to this business and economic slowdown, we're seeing revenues being slashed that are coming into local, state, and federal governments around the world. So that austerity is probably going to get more exaggerated. It's going to worsen because these governments are suddenly going to find they don't have the capital coming in to perform the services they used to for even the most basic needs for people. So we think that's going to add to the social unrest environment. And that brings me to another point that I just wonder if you and your team start to pick up on. There's always some turmoil in the world, and there's always a lot of old rivalries, but I've never seen so many surfacing at once that have been quiet for a long time. Azerbaijan, Armenia, for one area that had been quiet for quite a few years, now suddenly at each other's throats again, launching, violent attacks. Turkey and Greece threatening each other. Boy, there's an issue that we thought went away 40 years ago, 50 years ago. India and Pakistan exchanging gunfire at times. India and China itself also having some violent turmoils on their borders. China threatening Taiwan again. Now, in a host of all the old characters like North Korea and others that were troublesome, what it signals to us, though, is that there's a lot of political tension behind the scenes that's driving some of these countries to suddenly burst forth with old rivalries into violent action again. Does your team report that they're seeing more of that? And again, are they worried that there'll be other breakouts? In Latin America alone, we saw riots in Haiti. We're seeing a lot of elections coming up that could spell trouble. What about your team? Are you seeing more evidence of that?
Obviously, our team don't necessarily focus on kind of those statistics. Although the advisor I mentioned, Gareth Tennant is his name, the former head of intelligence, he measures that, he looks at that, and just through conversations, it's just very interesting in how, I guess, the world order in terms of what we had in maybe across the last 30 years in my lifetime is kind of breaking up in some forms, and a new version of that is being created. And I think we're in the middle of that. What will settle? Because obviously everything does settle. Things will settle down because economically, globally, we're connected. China is connected. Everyone is connected. And that's maybe one, you may disagree, but maybe one benefit of globalization, I know a lot of people find a lot of kind of negatives in globalization, is that we are connected. And therefore, if we don't get along, we all suffer economically. And that seems to the way that things run at the moment.
It's clear to us that with so much going on, you've got Brexit, you've got Europe in a slowdown, the United States here, not just the election, but we know it's going to be a very tough year ahead for whoever is elected as president. The fact of the matter is there are probably if you're a corporation or an international board of directors on a corporation and management, you're probably saying to yourself, maybe there's going to be more opportunities in other parts of the world. Maybe the Western world is not where we're going to be placing our new money, that's not where we're going to be placing our bets for the future. Do you hear that from any of your clients, or is that a trend that you see?
I think it's interesting because you would say if you were in the UK in like 5 years ago, 10 years ago, and there was stuff happening like Brexit in the UK, you would be thinking about going to the US. You would move there, and that's where you would make your living, because the US, Now it says in the UK, the US is probably in the same place. I wouldn't say Italy or Spain were places you would want to go in Europe, because they're, politically are in a very kind of a moving place. So where do you go? And maybe you're right. Asia is stable, more stable than Europe and America at the moment, and that's a really interesting thing to say, isn't it? Because I don't think we would have said that in a long time. And that things move around. There's a lot of predictions of China because of what's happened in the US, and hopefully
think of the consequences of that. The consequences of that might be. I mean, we know how much. Capital is very liquid at this point and can flow around the world. The foreign direct investment is an enormous part of a lot of economies. If what we're now thinking about turns out to be a general trend, it means China, parts of Asia could emerge much stronger in the years ahead.
I think it's interesting that in some ways, free market economics and capitalism works in a sense that the money flows globally. It will flow to the safe havens, which if it's not the States and it's not Europe, it's not the UK, it will go where it needs to go. And that's just the way we made it. And I don't think we ever expected for the US to be in a possible scenario that it may be in kind of November and December. No one would have expected that. Hopefully it doesn't come to pass. Hopefully whatever happens, it goes through kind of, peacefully, and things settle down. But there's a way to go, I think. And as you were just saying, money will go wherever it needs to go, wherever's safe. And that may not be the UK and US for the next kind of 6 months to a year. If you forget, we've got Brexit. Brexit is bigger in some ways to COVID for us, and it's kind of no one's talking about it because we can't. It's too much to talk about on COVID.
Okay. Well, final point, because we do have to bring this to a conclusion. With all the things we've discussed, all the things that we've said, do you see from your client base and from perhaps new prospective clients coming, are there parts of the world that look more interesting just from your firm's perspective?
I think, as you said, Asia would be really interesting. Singapore, we've been talking to clients in Singapore, that whole area, kind of the growth that's happening there is very interesting to us. And if we are a turning point in kind of history where kind of the US and UK have less influence, then, a lot of cultural, we work in the creative industries, a lot of the cultural zeitgeist that will start coming, not from the US and the UK as it has been for the last 40 years, but from China and from Southeast Asia. So that's a very interesting area for us.
Okay. Well, I hope we stay in touch. You sound like the kind of organization we'd like to touch base with from time to time to see what your intelligence is gathering, and we'll be glad to share ours with yours. It's been most interesting to meet you. Again, I just want to mention your name again. It's Justin Small. You're the founder, and it's the Future Strategy Club. Justin, again, thank you for your time. It's this morning for us. I know it's late afternoon for you in the UK. Let's both keep our eyes open and keep sharing information, because I think we're all going to have quite a challenge ahead. And I mean that, each one of our nations. And those of us who are responsible in any way and are part of business or other leaders, we're all going to really have to be smart about overcoming what I think is going to be a very tough year ahead. So thanks, Justin.
Thank you, Robert. Thank you for having me on.
Talk to you soon. Bye.
Bye.
Well, there we have it. Hearing from the Future Strategy Group was indeed sobering, to say the least. But as promised, I want to now talk about what the United States has to do to overcome probably the biggest problem facing our nation, perhaps since its inception over 250 years ago. That is our unsustainable debt. Because of this virus and because of the almost irresponsible spending on both sides of the aisle in Congress and the presidency, of course, we have contributed greatly to the national federal debt. There's only three ways that we can combat it. Higher taxes, but they don't necessarily have to be painful for the middle and lower classes. The first thing, of course, is to address what had been done under the Trump administration earlier, and that is to unwind those tax cuts that largely benefited the wealthiest citizens in our nation, and corporations. Few Americans realize, but at one time, and not so long ago, in the 1960s, the highest rate on income taxes for the wealthiest individuals in our society was 90%. Now we have a billionaire class that indeed has even been complaining that they haven't been paying too much. It's time to remedy that, have higher taxes, perhaps not 90%, but 50, 60% would do to rein in some of that capital. Corporate taxes the same way. At one time, corporate taxes were the largest contributors of revenue to the IRS, far surpassing what individuals gave. Now that chart has reversed. It started to take place in the 80s under the Reagan administration. And indeed, if you don't just count income tax, but indeed what you should count, which is payroll taxes, average Americans are paying much higher proportion of the revenues going into the IRS today than corporations are, and that has to be addressed as well. But that's just part one of our remedy. Part two has to do with probably the most important commodity that the United States has produced and exports, energy. What we should do is what Norway has been doing for decades and what even Russia finally understood has to be done. And Russia is a prime example of a country that in the early 90s was hundreds of billions of dollars in debt. For them, that was astronomical. Now, unlike us who have trillions in debt, they actually have trillions of dollars of surplus. That's right, the Russian Federation. And they did it all on one aspect of their tax regime, which was to tax exports of energy which were leaving their nation. We should do the same. Now, here is what Norway and Russia do, and other countries are starting to do it too. For domestically used consumption, in other words, for natural gas and petroleum products that are used domestically, the taxes stay low. Our consumers, our economy is able to take full advantage of the strategic assets that have been based under our soil. But for foreign oil companies, which by the way increasingly includes not just the United Kingdom and Netherlands and others, but China, yes, China and even Russia before, and even Venezuela to some degree, they would have to pay a much higher tax if any of that energy was exported beyond the shores of the United States for their consumption or for the global marketplace. This is what can produce a windfall of energy taxes for us and protect our strategic assets for use by our own citizens and economy. It would also, by the way, make it much more attractive to have a manufacturing plant here rather than to place it overseas where they could use cheap energy exported from the United States. Thirdly, and most importantly, finally, what we've seen in the financial markets over the last several decades has been the use of free money, which by the way is not free as far as US taxpayers are concerned. That's another story for another time, but we will make the case that when the Federal Reserve gives money away, as it has to the banks, they use it for something like the carry trade, which immediately exports that capital overseas to purchase bonds and stocks and other entities. Of course, the derivatives and options market has been running wild in our country as well. The trading portfolios of our commercial banks have been more profitable for them than in any other form of lending to our economy or our mortgage industry. This has got to be remedied, and there's only one way to do so, because the wild stock market has been based totally on this free money that has been invested only in a handful of companies that are benefiting from this perverted economy that we now find ourselves in. The answer is a financial transaction tax. It eliminates the flash trading and all this manipulation that has been going on, which is of no benefit to our economy, but rather is just a means for traders to take full advantage of the free money that's being offered through our Federal Reserve and commercial banks so that they could leverage this money as quickly as they can for trading activity, which again has nothing to do with benefiting small businesses, medium-sized businesses, or helping our economy here in the United States, or even lending to consumers so they could purchase homes, cars, or whatever else durable goods that they might need. So I maintain, and you'll see the figures and estimates from International Investor, that we can not only remedy our long-term federal debt, not only take care of Social Security and Medicare, which, by the way, themselves, if we just eliminate the cap on Social Security so that the high-income individuals have to pay into that, that would also be remedied even further. But if we take those prescriptions to heart, we can not only take care of our long-term debt, we can actually start to build surpluses again, which is what this nation needs, which is what we've enabled China, Russia, and other nations to do. And if we don't address it soon, before the return of inflation, which International Investor thinks is already here and moving quickly ahead, we're going to find that all those trillions of dollars of bonds that we owe to foreigners and others, including, again, Wall Street and offshore trading houses, will suddenly be much more painful for us to pay if we have to do it with dollars that are rapidly shrinking in terms of their purchasing power. So that is it for International Investor. We're going to devote another entire program to what's ahead for inflation the next time we talk. So I hope you stay tuned for that program as well. That's it for tonight. Keep your eyes open. We'll see you next time.